Welcome to Run, Build, Grow, the podcast that laces up its running shoes and dives deep into the heartbeat of the communal spirit of running. I'm your host, Andrew Ware, the RunninRev, and I'm thrilled to take you on this exhilarating journey where we explore stories that go beyond the pavement. This week, I am joined by a member of the ultra trail community, Aubree Reichel. Aubree is joining us from the state of Washington and comes in and we really talk about this community, about what it looks like for her to experience community through ultra marathoning, through trail racing, through all of these different things, and looking at it from the perspective of helping one another, of being there for one another, and what that means to her, what that looks like, what she has gotten from it, and then, because it's even more important, what she has been able to give back. And so this is such a great conversation. Let's dive in and hear about Aubree. All right, welcome in, everybody. We have another great guest. I'm joined by Aubree Reichel. Aubree, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well, holding things down here in Hampton Roads. And you know, we're continuing to get more amazing and awesome guests, and I think Aubree's going to keep that streak alive. I'm pretty confident. So, Aubree, let's get started where we do with every guest. What is your community, and what makes your community awesome?
So I guess a little bit of a backstory is I moved back to my hometown for the first time since 2004 in 2018 after living in Fort Wayne, Indiana for a little bit. And I had discovered running again there and established a community. So when I came back to my town, is called Puyallup. It's in Washington near Tacoma. I really didn't know anybody. And so what I've been able to do over the past 6 years is cultivate my own kind of networking community here using social media. So my community is mostly runners, and we've been able to connect through, I had a trivia group for a while, and just through Strava and Facebook and various social media platforms, I've been able to create a network here of runners, ultra runners, trail runners, road runners. My family's here. They're not runners, but they still count.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard as an adult going and starting somewhere new where you really don't have the community that you left behind leaving somewhere. And so my community here is just full of amazing. I have a lot of women that I look up to now, which hasn't always been the case. And yeah, my community is just great, like super supportive. I've been dealing with an injury lately, and so it hasn't been running. It's been a lot of coffee dates and friend stuff, and I wouldn't be doing as well mentally and emotionally dealing with this injury without them.
And so I think a lot of folks can kind of empathize with that feeling of moving from one place to another and almost feeling like you have to build the sense of community. Not in that the community's not there, because I think a lot of times when we go places, it's discovering the community or creating a space for the community. So when you moved back to Washington, what were those feelings like? What kind of stuff were you looking for? And how did you go about finding it? You know, you talked a little bit about social media, but even more so, getting those in-person interactions. How did you go about creating those relationships?
So when I first moved back, I had a job lined up just at a running store, which helped a lot. So working there, even though I was only there for about 5 months before I ended up finding my current job, having the running store employees helped a lot, because then I was able to run with them, train with them to start with. And it was like Strava was around, but it wasn't what it is now. You just kind of followed who you knew, kind of like what you do on Facebook, or less so Instagram now, because you follow a lot of people you don't know on Instagram. But yeah, it was even before that. So it was, you started with the running store communities and the group runs that they put on, and you just kind of branch out from there. And one thing about the Pacific Northwest is there's just a lot of people. And so
Mm.
there's a lot of runners and a lot of people, and because of the amount of geographic space it takes up and the population density, it can be really overwhelming to even kind of find your niche of, oh, I want to be running at a high level versus somebody who's just going out and doing 5Ks on the weekends. And there's nothing wrong with going out and doing 5Ks on the weekend. That's just not I have a lot of big goals that I want to accomplish beyond the the community aspect of it, and the community is a big part of that. But yeah, there's a Facebook group called the PNW Ladies Running Group,
Mm-hmm.
and it had, I don't know how many it had at the time that I moved back, but now it's up to 16,000 women, and it includes Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Northern California, Southern British Columbia. And so you find people from there, and then from a bigger pool of people, you then find your smaller pool and make it kind of more of the more intimate network.
And so, as you're discovering and finding these people around you, and not just where you currently reside, but even it seems like across the Pacific Northwest, even across the country, what do those relationships start to look like? And you talk about the differences of abilities and how that kind of plays out. So, what became sort of the communities that you were looking for? And then, even then, what are the communities that you found?
So the communities I was looking for was people to train with similar abilities and similar kind of just goal oriented of working towards improvement and getting faster, better, stronger, not necessarily just on trails where I excel, but just even in my own area and vicinity. So a few years ago, a woman reached out to me on Strava and was just like, "Hey, I saw you're on all these segments. You run the same areas that I do, around the same paces that I do. Let's meet up." And that kind of gave me a whole new appreciation for Strava of, oh, you can actually use this to network and build people. And um yeah, and so I have my group here in Puyallup that it's not a huge group, but it's people who are on similar schedule, like work schedules as me, because that's hard too, is finding somebody who can run at 7 o'clock in the morning or even as late as like 10 a.m., depending on my work schedule, and who are also chasing similar goals or run at similar easy paces. And then I also found the Trail Sisters group based out of Olympia that train at the trails that I really liked. Um, and all these like different Facebook groups that have come up, and you can just kind of identify a person in that group that's like, oh, I really like your vibe. I really like what you post. I really like how you
Mm,
comment and interact with other people. You seem cool. Let's be friends. Because it's not like in kindergarten, you can walk up to somebody playing with the same toy and be like, oh, hey, I like this too. Let's be friends. It should be that easy. But for some reason, as we get older and into adulthood, it's not. And
yeah.
I really wish it was.
No, I mean, so hard to make friends when you're adults, right? I love the story of like following or seeing people who have either, I don't know. I get really offended when folks take my local legend status on Strava. No, I'm
Yeah.
kidding. But yeah, when people are like running the same thing, there's like that connection of there's almost that connection of, hey, we're both like running on the same trails. We're both in the same area and linking up for runs. And even if it's not all the time, how much for you are you getting from being able to run with people? What have you noticed in your own running journey of being able to like link up with like two, three, four, however many folks for even if it's an easy run or a long run or, some trail? What's that meant for you to be able to find and link up with these people for these runs?
It's really important, especially coming from a background where I ran cross country in high school and college, and I was always in a team atmosphere. And I do run by myself sometimes, but it's nice to have that kind of emotional and mental, like, not crutch, but the support of, oh, I had a bad run, and you can go to them
Mm,
as if they were teammates.
mhm.
And as going through my current injury, like, I sprained my ankle really bad about a month ago, and I've never dealt with an ankle sprain this bad. And so it's also even having the positive affirmation of, oh, you're resting right now. That's a good thing. Don't push it. Kind of having that accountability, even though there's no team aspect of it in the sense of a cross country team or a track team. I still want to have the accountability to them to go get back out there and join them for runs as well. And even so, just the beyond the being able to join for runs, it's the emotional support and the mental support um to just navigate life.
Yeah, and I mean, I
Mhm.
think I mean, it's such a big thing because there is a lot of the running community that often will feel the need that I have to run by myself, or because it's my journey, I kind of go it alone. And it can be a good mind. I mean, it can lead to good things because not all runs can happen with other people, but I think that there's something special about being able to share miles with other folks. I mean, I know for me, like, especially if I've got to go out for a long run, a lot of times I'll try and sync my long run up with friends because, it makes the miles go by quicker. It helps to keep my mind off of how much my body is hurting and dying. And, you know, those people become friends because the miles that you spend together leads to more than just being like people on this earth, or even just leads to more than runners. I mean, there's a lot that can happen on a run. And so when you're running, when you're doing all of this stuff, what are you noticing from these relationships, whether in real life or social media? How are they building you up? I mean, they don't necessarily always make you faster, but what are these relationships doing for you, like, inwardly?
I think it's good to have them, like I said, for the emotional support and oh, I'm not sure about this, like any decision that I'm making, or if I need help trying to pick out a race or a route or a safety concern, or there's just so many things, like you said, that can happen on a run that I'm like, you can like decompress. And even sometimes for me, I'm my friend's biggest cheerleader too. So it's not even so much what they do for me, but what I can offer to them in terms of support or advice, or even connecting them with other people. That's one thing I've really enjoyed with the network I've built here is I feel like so many people are multifaceted that, I mean, I was at a group run on Sunday and somebody was like, oh, I really want to get into coaching kids, but I don't know anybody. And one of the women that was there, her husband's a local athletic director at one of the middle schools. And it's like, well, I don't know anybody, but let me connect you with this other person who happens to be here today. And you guys can exchange contact information and let's see if we can get you on into that coaching. So it's, and then they can do the same for me of, oh, like one of my other friends is a coach in the area and she's like, oh, I've been running with this person, let me introduce you, they're amazing. And even though I don't use her coaching services, she works with a lot of really good athletes too, and so it just helps to expand the community and the network. And it's just, it can be so overwhelming with how many people live in this area, but the running world is so small that you always know somebody who knows somebody. And
And
I
so what does
think,
this mean? Yeah, go ahead.
that's really important to have as far as a support network, um, for non-related running related things.
And so you talk about it going beyond, right, your local area, where it's now not just like Washington, but It's going across and finding folks at races. And so as you're going out, as you're doing races, as you're participating, as you're cheering, what does that community support bring you? And then even when you're going out to races to run or to cheer, you talked a little bit about what you're able to offer back. What then are you continuing to do for that crew?
I think just the support network of kind of I kind of I don't know, trying to think of how to phrase it, of when somebody has a bad race or a disappointment, just even somebody being reassuring of you can be disappointed and proud of your accomplishment at the same time. Like, I think a lot of people need that reminder after a rough race or a rough time of you can be proud of yourself of how you handled things, but you can also be disappointed that things didn't go perfectly or according to plan. Um, or even like during races, I always carry like extra electrolytes or extra gels, extra food, because sometimes you come along to somebody and they're struggling and it's like, do you need anything? Like I was at Black Canyon last year and I was really struggling with nausea and just my fueling was off. And I came across a river crossing, and on the other side there was a woman who was like crying and walking up the hill, and I offered her like an oatmeal cream pie or something, and she declined, and which was fine. And so I offered her a hug, and just something as simple as a hug, she was like, "Yes." And it just like she was about to drop at the next aid station because her hip flexor gave out, but like I don't know, like people are struggling, and even if you're struggling, if you turn that outwardly onto somebody else, it helps like emotionally kind of bring back to, oh, I'm no longer focusing on myself at this time, I'm focusing on somebody else. And then it takes time for me to recover, and then I feel better emotionally, and then I can kind of bounce back in my race. And so it kind of seems counterintuitive to take time for somebody else in a race, but it can also be a huge kind of mental boost. And I think that aspect of racing and community is important, even if you never see the person again, or even if you don't know their name or anything about them. It's they're having a rough time, and helping somebody along just kind of builds that. And I hope she's doing okay.
And I mean that sort of empathy, especially like for trail and ultra runners. I mean, those just the length and everything that goes into a lot of those races. It seems like a lot of this, especially kind of hearing your story, it seems like a lot of this builds out of, what I would see as like that cross country background. I love to always think about that. I yearn back for the days when I was on cross country, and I often will like try and do races with friends where they're run club races and they're encouraging the run club to enter together and try and get most runners or fastest runners, and think about what those times look. I mean, how much of that joy and passion of like kind of like team racing, how much do you think that that's playing a role? I mean, it seems like it's playing a role in a lot of this. But how much is that playing a role in how you're looking at who you are as a runner and what you're doing? And then how does that also play a role in wanting to run fast? Because I think that those two things can be balanced together. I don't think they need to be, you don't need to sacrifice one for the other. But what does that look like for you?
A lot of the people that I end up running with end up doing different races than I do. So
Mm.
like the woman that reached out to me on Strava a number of years ago, we've done a lot of races, but she excels at the half marathon distance and has done a couple marathons in order to like qualify for Boston. And so we've gone down to the Eugene Marathon a couple times for her. And even though like I'm not racing with her, we've been that course lends itself well to very good spectators. And since it's on kind of a bike path, we can kind of jump in and help her as needed and kind of check in with her. And so she knows she's supported. And then I can also get my
Mm.
miles in because you're just running around the course like crazy. But then she does the same thing for me when I go to races, if they're local. And she showed up at the starting line of my last trail race of just like, oh, hey, yeah, I was in the area. Figured I'd do my miles here.
Yeah.
And so even if we're not doing the same races, there's still that presence of you have somebody there at the finish line or the starting line or along the course that you're going to be excited to see that you may not otherwise get if you were going to a race alone. Or if I travel with friends to a race, then it's okay, well, what kind of story do I want to tell at the end of this race when my friends that are also doing the race, when they ask me about my experience, like we can share
Mhm.
experiences. It's like, what kind of story are we going to tell to each other? And, oh, I'm going to have to remember, oh, this XYZ event happened during this race, so I can tell my friends later. Or, um, even there's some parts along the courses where I'll say, oh, this water crossing is really high. Be careful when you get to this place. And we'll check in with each other. And especially like something like Black Canyon, where I had, I think, 4 or 5 other people with me that I knew kind of on the course. Yeah, so the stories are fun to be able to share experiences, even if you're like doing the same thing. Everyone's
Mhm.
gonna have a different experience with that. I don't know if that fully answered your question. I'm sorry.
No, but and I mean, I think that this is one of the cool things that we see in community. And you talk about, struggling, that idea that many of us struggle with, which is finding friends in adulthood. And to reflect back that it did feel so much easier when we were kids, right? You were on a sports team, you were doing something with other people, you practiced 3, 4, 5 times a week with them,
You see
or
them
you
in
were in school
school.
all the time. Yeah,
Yeah.
you were in school with them all the time. And so they were naturally there. And I think now as adults, we're trying to look for that community. And to me, I love the replication that we've kind of brought into this, where we bring that perspective as runners of doing this thing together. No runner left behind, or we're all having fun together. Everybody's pace matters, all of these things. And so what does this mean for your goals? Like what do your goals, Aubree, look like in this time, and not just for you, but then for other people as well?
Me personally, a long-term goal is to run Western States. So I have 4 tickets in the lottery for it's what next weekend, not this coming
Mm-hmm.
weekend, the weekend after, December 7th. And if I don't get into that, then I obviously have a qualifier. I'm looking at Waldo 100K. And ideally, big goal would be to podium there. And the community aspect in regard to my goals is I have friends who have ran Waldo. I have friends who have ran Western States. And so their knowledge of the course and everything will be really important when I get to that point,
Yeah.
depending on how lotteries shake out. And then just the training aspect too of I have friends who support me in my goals. And even if they aren't doing the same big race, their races are important too, and they're going to have training. And I have a friend who also got into Tahoe 200, and so his training is going to line up really well if I do Western States, and he's going to be in a lot of races. And I'm encouraging my boyfriend to join him on his races. So um sharing not necessarily sharing the same goals, but having very similar timelines of people's and
Yeah.
their big races, and being able to support each other and bounce ideas off of each other of, oh, this gel is really working for me for nutrition, or this drink mix, or this fueling strategy, because that's a huge part of trail and ultra running, is trying to figure out different foods. And especially with the whole spring incident last year of it wasn't actually what they claimed, which
Yeah.
resulted in a lot of people having to rethink their fueling strategies. And yeah, just sharing miles together, sharing time, quality time is really big. And so, especially when you're in the thick of training and it does take so much time away from the house, away from other things, to be able to share that with other people also kind of checks the box of being relatively social and having that social connection and the need for that and feeling like you don't have to sacrifice one for the other.
And I mean, it seems to me, especially hearing stories from the ultra community, how much of, I mean, really like a tight knit community that is because of that shared experience and hearing stories like Western States and all of these other ones. What's that like for you as you're on the course, receiving support from like your crew team or even other ultra runners? What are some of those things that then you are looking for in community and experiencing community, especially as you're doing something as grueling as 100 miler?
Yeah, you have to acknowledge of how much time other people are putting into it out of love. I volunteered at races as well, and I try to as much as I can because it is the quality of volunteers that also participate at aid stations, and they have so many times they know the right words to say to get people out and
Mm,
moving, and just like just the appreciation I have for volunteers, especially at the big races at Western States or even some of the smaller races that I've done, of just acknowledgement of, yeah, this sucks. You're
yeah.
tired, but you're doing great. You're really smart. I've only done 100 miler, and it was at Indiana Trail 100, which is where I started trail running. And so it was kind of perfect for me to go back there. It was my first 100. This was 3 years ago. And I got
Mm,
to an aid station at mile like 33, and I looked at the volunteer and I was like, it is way too soon for me to be feeling this bad. And she just looked at me and said, eat and keep going. And it's like, okay. So then I get to the next station 5 hours or 5 miles later, and I look at the different volunteer, and she's like, you're really running a really smart race. How are you feeling? I said, I'm tired, but I've been running for 7 hours, so I'm allowed to be tired. She's like,
yeah.
exactly. You're doing great. And so just the validity, the kind of the validation of feelings that the volunteers have. They always seem to have solutions up their sleeve of, hey, try this, hey, do this. Oh, you're feeling nauseous, here, drink this broth. Like, especially in the longer distance events where your brain just kind of stops working, you really do rely on the community aspect to provide solutions to the problems that you face, because it could easily be something you've never experienced before.
Mm. And I think that that's such an important thing that sometimes we might take for granted as runners is realizing the support that's there and realizing the support that's out there and thinking that we have to go it alone, right? And almost circling this back to where you started when you started talking about community of not, you didn't come back to a new place because it sounds like it's where your family lives, but coming back to a place that you weren't as familiar with. And I definitely empathize with that as moving back to where I grew up and yet coming back to a completely different place and what it looks like for you to be a part of that community. How much mentally is it for you? Excuse me. How much mentally is it for you to maybe overcome sort of that hesitancy to, oh, what if I don't get help? What if nobody out there, what if nobody out there wants to run with me? What if nobody out there wants to help me? What if, how do you overcome that mental struggle of being like, no, like this really is a supportive community?
I think there is a certain amount of independence that does happen of, I have to go do this run even though I don't have anybody to run with. Like, you can ask
Mm,
around, you can see, like, at one point I had Wednesdays and Thursdays off, so I was having to do my long runs on Thursdays. And that was really hard to try to find people to do. Oh, do you have time at noon on a Thursday to go out and run in the woods for 5 hours? And it's like most people don't. And so it's then, okay, that I'm telling people this is where I'll be. I'll check in if I'm having a rough time. I just like, if I have cell service, I'll be able to send a
mm,
message, or like they're still kind of there, even if they're not physically there. But then there's also still the, if I wait until somebody's available to go with me, I'm never going to do it. And
Yeah.
that's kind of a lesson that is also learned of you have the community, you have the support, and you have that as a cushion. But then there is the aspect of you still have to put in the work. You still have to have the intrinsic motivation to get out there and chase those goals. Because you'll have the support, which is great, but you still set goals for yourself, and there's still that individual aspect of it.
Well, and I think, and I mean, that's the hardest part about all of it, right? Is your own mental, I guess, hurdles that you try and overcome. And, I wonder how much also, what's it been like for you to go? Like, I mean, you seem very like forthcoming, like, hey, I'm just going to go here. I'm going to do this. How much do you think that is something where it's like, all right, well, let me throw myself into this, or let me do this, or let me do that. I want to try things. I want to get invested in things. How much of a role do you think that plays into it too?
Um, I think it depends on the day. But I mean, there are times where it's like, if I go out and do something by myself, it's because I've done it before. A lot of the new routes, a lot of new places I won't go to by myself, both from a safety standpoint and from a familiarity standpoint of if I'm going to go out for a run, I don't want to have to sit there and route find the whole time.
Mm.
And so, and there's a balance to it of, I mean, even both running and not running. If I tell one of my friends, oh, I have this big goal of, um, hiking up to Camp Muir at Mount Rainier, which is basically the base camp at 10,000 feet, and being at sea level, like that sounds daunting to me. It's not like climbing a Colorado 14er where you can just hike the whole way. And it's like, oh, well, I want to go do this. That is a goal. I'm not going to do it by myself, but that is a goal. And then to have friends that'll be like, we'll go with you. We can plan it for this
Yeah.
day at this time. We have to get there by this time, and this. The weather is going to be this. And like, whole new experience, but then having the people to be like, oh, yeah, let's go do this. Absolutely. We will support you. And it makes it a lot harder to back out. If like,
Mm.
oh, I'm scared. This is scary. If you have somebody there that's like, oh no, it's fine. Oh, but if you're really scared, we can just turn back. We can take it as it like to have the option to quit, but not want to quit, obviously. Um, so yeah, it's a very delicate balance between wanting to do new things, wanting to do stuff by myself, but also the vulnerability of being reliant on the community to do those big goals.
And I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, that's where the community best helps and best serves, and that we can even best help and best serve as members of the community. I think I wonder what that looks like reciprocally for you. How, having experienced this yourself, now are you one who is almost leading from the front in a way of, you talked about when you're not running a race, or even maybe once you're done with a race or in the midst of a race, helping folks. How much do you feel called to kind of give back in that way to the community so that others can see this joy that you've seen?
I haven't honestly given it a whole lot of thought. Um, and it's hard to like, you want to do it because it's out of the goodness of your heart, but then you also want to be a good example for people, so then you kind of have to brag about this good thing that you did. And so it's like a weird balance between like, oh yeah, I am withdrew from this race due to injury, but I'm going to go volunteer instead. And so it's like, oh, look
Yeah.
at me, I'm so special. But it's like that is an option that people forget about, is if you allocate this time in your schedule, like mentally, to be like, oh, well, on December 15th, I was going to do this race, but now I'm not going to. Well, if you still block off that time in your schedule and your availability, there are other ways to be there to give back.
Mm.
And a lot
And
of these race organizations do compensate their volunteers in the form of race entries or other things, because it's a huge part of being able to put on these events.
And it's just a huge part of the community too, because I can think of a lot of races where there hasn't been like course support or folks cheering and things like that. And I mean, these are everything from 5Ks to half
Mhm.
marathons, and there really is something when community shows out, when community supports, when community they enhance the race. And whether that's, 10,000 people cheering on the sidelines of, X big major marathon, or even just having a handful of extra volunteers at an aid station on an ultra course, or, I directing a race, I saw how much of a benefit it was to just have like smiling faces out there passing out water. I think it's important for us to like realize how much that stuff is important. And I think in a lot of ways, experience becomes sort of the reiterating factor in a lot of that. Is when I look at running community over and over again, it is what we experience, hopefully being given back to the community. And so, having seen that participation, having seen all of the positive stories yourself, the ways that you're able to give back, the ways that you're able to support, the ways that you're able to be there for others, I think that kind of becomes part of this whole game. And I mean, again, the ultra community is nothing that I will ever experience. I promise. I've tried to tell Aaron Kuntz this like dozens of times, but there's just so much there. All of these ultra runners that I interview, that I talk to, there's that sense that there's something that's bringing y'all together. Not that it's not happening in like the road in the road community. I think we have a great thing going on, and when you look at a lot of this stuff, there's so much to learn from one another, from everything in that midst, because there's different ways to be supported in each. And I even like reflect back on, where you started this conversation of looking for those folks who are encouraging you, looking for those folks who are pushing you. Are what are those ways that you're continuing to foster those relationships, to keep them healthy, to keep them strong, even in terms of finding people, not just in Washington, but through social media, who are helping to keep you accountable to this running journey?
I think a lot of it just comes down to it's it's all just running. Um,
Mm,
it's very simple. The training between road and trail is very similar in that you just put in a lot of miles, a lot of solid foundation. And so just being supportive of what people are going through and validating their concerns of, oh, I wasn't able to get a run in today. I'll try again tomorrow. Or I'm going through a really hard time right now, and
mhm.
this stress is really weighing on me. And just the valid people being able to give validation of the emotional aspect and how the emotional toll can impact running. And that doesn't have to be in person. But if you just give validation to people emotionally and acknowledge vulnerability and like just talk, we're all just people. We're all just trying our best.
Mm,
It kind of goes back to kind of being kids again. As children, we all seek validation, and I don't. And while that kind of dissipates a little bit as we get older, I feel like that inherent want and desire for being seen is the same.
yeah.
And I feel like that's often ignored because we're adults. We're not supposed to feel these things anymore because we outgrew them. And it's like, oh, yes and no. We have the self-awareness of our feelings, but doesn't mean that they went away. And I think even just the acknowledgement of the impact emotional health has on our physical well-being, and just the continued acknowledgement of that is huge. And just
Mm,
the paradigm shift of everything that exercise can do emotionally, physically, and your whole thing is about community, and being able to foster that is huge. And it keeps people coming out and finding that community too. Of if you provide it, they will come.
And I think it's something that can't be taken for granted for either, because we look at how important community, all of these important things that community has led to, just in the different areas and the different ways. And when it becomes something that's neglected or even forgotten, I mean, I feel like, especially when we think of what it looks like to move to new communities, to be a runner, it almost has invited for a lot of folks to be able to build community around, a large subsection of people. It's not necessarily always going to be people who are at the same level you are, right? I'm not always going to find sometimes I may I may have community relationships with ultra marathoners, but there's still things that I can learn, and there's still ways that we and one another can help each other grow. And I wonder how much these running communities, they continue to expand, and we begin to see sort of the benefits and the fruits of what it looks like to connect even across, long distances, and what it means to be a part of those communities. It's almost like we take that feeling that we're looking for, that yearning just to know that someone somewhere is doing something like we are doing. And then even the sharing of miles, the support at races, all of these things just becomes that added benefit, that added layer on top for us to be able to continue to build, continue to grow, continue to do all of these different things. So what an amazing conversation. Aubree, let's wrap up with these end of podcast questions here. What is your favorite distance to run?
Road halves, trail 50Ks.
All right. We got a half marathoner there. That's nice. But really 50K. All right. That's not a bad distance. What is your favorite thing to eat post run? Food, snack, meal? What are you going for?
A quarter pounder with cheese from McDonald's and a Coke.
All right. And then lastly, Aubree, can you give our listeners a reason to join their local run club or group?
I don't even know where to start. I think you get what you give. And so if you start participating, you get more than you give, really. Once you start participating, it makes it so much easier to keep going.
And going, she will continue to do. We'll stay updated. Keep us updated on Western states, and hopefully you get in. You got this. And so thank you so much for joining on this episode, Aubree.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, what an amazing episode. What a great lesson. What a great learning that we can take as we look and see what it means for us to be connected with one another, for us to experience community with one another. When we look and see those different ways that we can be there for runners who are around us, whether they're running the same race as us, whether we're collecting miles with them, or whether they are achieving goals on their own, what that looks like for each and every one of us. It's not just about one person, it's not just about one place, but it's about everything that surrounds this entire process of who we are. And for me, I loved that connection that Aubree was able to make as she saw what it meant to be there for others, to do all of these different things in community, not just to better herself, but even to better others. Because for us, it can be very overwhelming when we think about what it means to be community, but to sit back and to reflect on what community has meant to us, what community has been able to give to us, and then what we are able to offer back to community. What a great and important lesson for each and every one of us to learn. I think about the ways that she was connecting, reconnecting, getting involved, and doing a lot of these different things. As we look and see what Aubree's journey helps us to understand, it is this way that, again, Running is interconnected, and that is meant to help to build us up, meant to be there for us, to receive that support, to be lifted up, to know that we are not alone in this journey. And when we truly experience that, when we see it, that is when we begin to be able to look and see how we're able to offer it back, to give it to others, to do all of these different things. I want to thank you for hanging out with me here on Run, Build, Grow. If you have a great story, I'd love to hear it. Email me at andrew@runninrev.com and we can get you booked for a podcast recording. And don't forget, connect with me on Instagram, Blue Sky, Strava, Substack. You'll find those links in the show notes. I publish and put content all over those places. You know, if today's episode gave you a spark, don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or head over to runbuildgrow.com to catch every podcast. You can go back and listen to the catalog, and even if you subscribe, have future episodes just automatically pop up in your feed. Got an extra minute? Jump on to Apple Podcasts, leave a quick rating or review. If you're on Spotify, drop a rating and a comment on this episode and other episodes you listen to. You know, it's a simple way to help others discover the show and even let me know what's resonating with you. And here's the deal. If you leave a review, I'll give you a shout out right here in the next episode. Want to go the extra mile? Support the podcast and keep it growing strong by heading to buymeacoffee.com/runninrev. Whether it's a one-time tip because you just absolutely enjoyed this episode, or if you want to become a regular supporter and a monthly member supporter of this podcast, every contribution helps this community grow on and off the run. Thanks for being here and for being part of this journey. Until next time, go crush it out there. And as always, make every mile count.